The phone call that shattered my world came on a crisp Saturday morning in October. My daughter-in-law Cordelia's voice was cheerful, too cheerful, as she casually mentioned their weekend getaway to the mountains. "We've got everything all sorted out. Mom Beatrice," she said, as if discussing the weather. What she didn't say spoke volumes louder than her words ever could. There was no invitation, no "would you like to join us?" No acknowledgement that I might want to be part of their family adventure. In that moment, sitting in my kitchen with my morning coffee growing cold, I realized I had become invisible in my own family. For 71 years, I've navigated life's ups and downs with grace and resilience. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband passed when I was 45. I worked 2 jobs to put food on the table and clothes on their backs. When my son Bartholomew married Cordelia 6 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms, thinking I was gaining a daughter. How foolishly optimistic I was. The signs had been there for months, creeping in like shadows at dusk. The Sunday dinners became less frequent. The phone calls grew shorter and more utilitarian, usually requests for me to watch their Australian shepherd, Wellington, or to pick up groceries when they were too busy with their careers. I had become the family's unpaid assistant, summoned when convenient, forgotten when not needed. That Saturday morning, as Cordelia's words echoed in my ears, something inside me cracked. "Well, I hope you both have a wonderful time," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my empty house, surrounded by photographs of family gatherings where I had always been present, always supportive, always available. Yet somehow, I had transformed from essential family member to afterthought. I spent the rest of that day replaying every interaction from recent months. How Cordelia would text me brief messages, "Can you watch Wellington? We'll be back Sunday." Never, "Would you mind?" or "We'd appreciate it if..." Just commands disguised as requests. How Bartholomew, my own flesh and blood, had stopped calling just to chat. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics and obligations. The guest bedroom upstairs, which I had lovingly prepared for their visits, now gathered dust. The extra place setting I used to automatically include at dinner sat unused in the cabinet. I had been slowly erased from their lives, and I had been too busy being helpful to notice. As evening approached, I found myself staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror. When had I become this woman, this shadow, who existed only to serve others' needs, the grandmother who was good enough to babysit the dog, but not worthy of a family vacation? My late husband, Reginald, would have been appalled. He always said I had the strength of 10 people and the heart of a lioness. Where had that woman gone that night? I lay awake thinking about respect, not love. I knew they loved me in their way, but respect was different. Respect meant considering my feelings. Respect meant including me in family decisions. Respect meant treating me like a human being rather than a convenience store that happened to share their DNA. By Sunday morning, my hurt had crystallized into something harder, something more purposeful. I wasn't going to cry or beg for their attention. I wasn't going to have a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I was going to do something that would make them understand my value in terms they might actually comprehend. I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. For years, I had been the financial safety net for Bartholomew and Cordelia. When they bought their house, I co-signed the loan. When Cordelia's car broke down, I gave them my emergency credit card. When they needed help with their mortgage payments during Bartholomew's brief unemployment, I quietly transferred money into their account. I had become their personal bank, never asking for anything in return except to be treated like family. My finger hovered over the freeze cards option. This wasn't about money. It was about recognition. If they could plan a family vacation without considering me family enough to invite, then perhaps they didn't need my financial family support either. I pressed the button. The confirmation message appeared instantly. All linked cards have been frozen. Cardholders will be notified of temporary suspension. I set the phone down and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of personal power. For the first time in decades, I had chosen myself first. The hours that followed passed quietly. I made myself a proper breakfast with real eggs and fresh orange juice instead of my usual rushed toast. I took a long bath with lavender salts I had been saving for a special occasion. I called my sister Ophelia in Arizona, someone who had always made me feel valued and heard. We talked for 3 hours about books, politics, and her grandchildren's latest achievements. It was the longest conversation I'd had in months where I wasn't being asked to do something for someone else. When the phone finally rang late Sunday afternoon, I let it go to voicemail, then again and again. By evening, I had 7 missed calls from Bartholomew and 4 text messages from Cordelia, each more frantic than the last. Mom, the cards aren't working. We can't pay for gas. What's wrong with the credit cards? Please call us back. I poured myself a glass of the wine I had been saving and read each message carefully. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one expressed concern for my well-being. They were all about their inconvenience, their problems, their needs. Even in crisis, I remained invisible as a person with feelings. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow would bring consequences, explanations, and probably anger. But tonight, for the first time in years, I went to bed knowing that Beatrice mattered, not as a caregiver, not as a financial resource, not as a dog sitter, but as a woman who deserved basic consideration and respect from the people who claimed to love her. The mountain weekend that excluded me had become the catalyst for something much bigger, my awakening to the fact that I had been living my life on everyone else's terms. At 71 years old, I was finally ready to start living it on mine. Monday morning arrived with the persistence of an unwelcome visitor. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when the pounding began, not gentle knocks, but aggressive, demanding thuds that echoed through my quiet home like gunshots. Through the peephole, I could see Cordelia standing on my porch, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her face a mask of barely contained fury. She didn't wait for me to fully open the door before pushing past me into my living room. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Beatrice," her voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Do you have any idea what you've done? We're stranded up there with no way to pay for anything. The hotel, the restaurants, even gas to get home, nothing works." She whirled around to face me, her designer hiking boots clicking against my hardwood floors. "Bartholomew is having a complete meltdown, and I've never been so embarrassed in my entire life." I closed the door slowly, deliberately, taking my time to gather my thoughts. For months, I had imagined this moment, the confrontation that would force us to address the elephant that had been stomping through our family relationships. Yet now that it was here, I felt surprisingly calm, as if I were watching this scene unfold from a great distance. "Would you like some coffee, Cordelia?" I asked, my voice steady as granite. Her mouth dropped open. "Coffee, coffee. Are you completely out of your mind?" "I don't want coffee. I want an explanation. I want those cards unfrozen immediately. She pulled out her phone and waved it at me like a weapon. I've got 17 missed calls from the hotel manager, 6 from the restaurant where we had dinner last night, and Bartholomew has been pacing around our room like a caged animal since 6 this morning. I walked to my favorite armchair, the one Reginald had bought me for our 25th anniversary, and sat down with the dignity I had been suppressing for far too long. I'm not going to unfreeze anything until we have a conversation. Cordelia. A real conversation about how I've been treated in this family. Treated. She let out a harsh laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. You've been treated like family. We include you in everything. Do you? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Tell me, Cordelia, when was the last time you asked my opinion about anything? When was the last time you invited me somewhere because you wanted my company? Not because you needed something from me. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. I could see her mind racing, searching for examples that we both knew didn't exist. I take care of Wellington whenever you ask, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I've loaned you money more times than I can count. I've babied your house when you went on other vacations. Vacations I was never invited to join. I've cooked countless meals for you both, helped you move furniture, driven you to the airport at ungodly hours. But tell me, Cordelia, what do you do for me? Her face flushed red. We appreciate everything you do. You know we're grateful. Grateful I stood up, feeling every one of my 71 years transformed into strength rather than weakness. Grateful people don't treat someone like hired help. Grateful people consider feelings before making plans. Grateful people remember that the person helping them is a human being with emotions and needs. You're being ridiculous, she snapped, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. We didn't invite you on this trip because you don't usually like outdoor activities. You never go hiking or camping. You never asked if I wanted to learn. You never asked if I might enjoy trying something new. You never asked. Period. I moved closer to her, close enough to see the guilt flickering behind her defensive anger. When did you decide that you knew what I liked better than I do? When did you become the authority on what Beatrice wants or doesn't want? She took a step backward. We were just trying to be considerate. Considerate would have been including me in the conversation. Considerate would have been saying, hey, Mom Beatrice, we're planning a mountain getaway. Would you like to join us? Or would you prefer we make other arrangements for Wellington? But that didn't happen, did it? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see Cordelia struggling with something, perhaps the first genuine moment of self-reflection she'd had in years. I didn't think, she began, then stopped. No, you didn't think about me. Anyway, you thought about your plans, your convenience, your desires, but you never considered that I might have feelings about being excluded from family activities. I sat back down, suddenly feeling the weight of all the years I had spent swallowing my hurt. Do you know what it's like to realize that you've become invisible to the people you love most? Her expression softened slightly, but the defensiveness remained. We don't think of you as invisible. We think of you as reliable, dependable. Those are qualities you want in a dishwasher. Cordelia, not a family member. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they needed to be said. I've spent 6 years trying to be the perfect mother-in-law, never complaining, never making demands, always available whenever you needed anything. And what has it gotten me? A phone call, about your vacation plans delivered like a weather report. That's not, we didn't mean to make you feel. She trailed off, finally seeming to grasp the magnitude of what I was saying. You didn't mean to, but you did. And this isn't the first time. I leaned forward, making sure she could see the sincerity in my eyes. Last Christmas, you made dinner plans without asking if I had preferences. Last spring, you bought new furniture for the guest room without consulting me about whether it was comfortable. You planned Bartholomew's birthday celebrations without including me in the decisions. I'm not part of your family discussions. I'm just expected to go along with whatever you've already decided. Cordelia sank down onto my sofa, her anger seemingly deflated. We thought you liked being involved without the stress of making decisions. I liked being involved, period. But there's a difference between being included in decisions and being informed of them after they're made. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Reginald and I had planted together decades ago. I spent 40 years making decisions. Cordelia, I raised 3 children, ran a household, managed a career, navigated widowhood. I didn't suddenly become incompetent when Bartholomew got married. I never said you were incompetent. You didn't have to say it. Your actions said it for you. I turned back to face her. Every time you made plans without consulting me, every time you assumed you knew what was best for me, every time you treated me like a convenience rather than a person, you were telling me that my opinions and preferences don't matter. She was crying now, quiet tears that she tried to wipe away discreetly. I don't know how to fix this, Beatrice. I don't know what you want from us. I want respect, Cordelia. I want to be treated like an adult human being who has thoughts, feelings, and preferences. I want to be asked, not told. I want to be included, not just utilized. I sat down across from her, my voice gentling slightly. I don't want to be your enemy, but I can't continue being your unpaid servant either. We never thought of you as a servant, she whispered. Then why do all of our interactions revolve around what you need from me? When was the last time either of you called just to see how I was doing? When did you last ask about my day, my interests, my concerns that didn't directly affect you? The silence that followed was profound. I could see Cordelia mentally reviewing months of interactions, perhaps for the first time seeing them from my perspective. I'm going to ask you something, I said finally, and I want you to answer honestly. If you had to describe my personality, my hobbies, my dreams to a stranger, could you do it? She stared at me for a long moment, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I thought so, I said quietly. You see me as Mom Beatrice who takes care of things, not as Beatrice who has her own life, interests, and needs. And that, my dear, is the heart of our problem. Cordelia covered her face with her hands. I've been horrible to you, haven't I? You've been thoughtless. There's a difference, and it's one we can work with if you're willing to make real changes. I leaned forward, reaching out to touch her shoulder. But this isn't something that can be fixed with an apology and a promise to do better. This requires fundamental changes in how you see me and how you include me in your lives. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What do we do now? Now, I said, settling back in my chair. We have a real conversation about what a healthy family relationship looks like. And after that, maybe we can talk about those credit cards. The call from Prudence came 3 days after my confrontation with Cordelia, just as I was beginning to wonder if I had permanently severed the fragile threads that held our family together. Prudence was Bartholomew's aunt, his father's sister, and had always been the family's unofficial peacemaker. Her voice carried that familiar tone of gentle authority that had settled countless family disputes over the decades. "Beatrice, honey, I think it's time we all sat down together," she said without preamble. "This situation has gone on long enough, and frankly, I'm tired of watching my family tear itself apart over something that should have been addressed years ago." I clutched the phone tighter, my heart racing. "Prudence, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not sure Cordelia is ready to hear what needs to be said. Our conversation the other day was intense." "That's exactly why we need to do this properly," she replied firmly. "Bartholomew called me yesterday, practically in tears. He knows something went terribly wrong, but he can't quite grasp what it is. And Cordelia, well, she's been doing a lot of thinking since she left your house. I think she's finally starting to understand the damage that's been done." The following Saturday afternoon found us gathered in Prudence's cozy living room, the same space where we had celebrated countless birthdays, holidays, and family milestones over the years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, meeting in neutral territory to discuss why I no longer felt like part of the family that had once gathered so naturally in these very rooms. Bartholomew arrived first, looking haggard and uncomfortable in a way that tugged at my maternal heartstrings despite everything. He was my son, after all, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions as if they were roses, who called me every Sunday during his college years just to hear my voice. Seeing him struggle with our fractured relationship was perhaps the most painful part of this entire ordeal. Cordelia entered moments later, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like humility. She had clearly been crying, her eyes were puffy, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had spent sleepless nights wrestling with uncomfortable truths. Prudence, ever the hostess, served tea and homemade cookies, but the familiar rituals of family gathering felt strained and artificial. We sat in a careful triangle, each of us occupying our own island of tension in the room where we had once shared so much joy. "I asked you all here," Prudence began, settling into her favorite rocking chair, "because I love each of you dearly, and I can't stand watching this family implode over something that should have been addressed long ago. Beatrice, you've been the backbone of this family for decades. You raised Bartholomew with more grace and strength than most people could manage, and you welcomed Cordelia with open arms when she joined our family." Bartholomew shifted uncomfortably. "Aunt Prudence, I know there have been some misunderstandings. Stop right there." Prudence held up her hand. "This isn't about misunderstandings. Bartholomew, this is about neglect. This is about taking someone for granted until they finally refuse to be taken for granted anymore." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken truths. I could see Bartholomew processing his aunt's words, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been shame. "Your mother," Prudence continued, her voice gentle but unwavering, "has spent the last 6 years bending over backwards to be the perfect mother-in-law, the perfect grandmother-in-waiting, the perfect family support system. And how have you repaid that devotion? By treating her like hired help, by assuming she'll always be available when you need her, but never considering what she might need from you." Cordelia's voice was barely a whisper. "We never meant to. Intent doesn't matter when the impact is this devastating." I interrupted, finding my voice at last. "You never meant to exclude me. You never meant to take me for granted. You never meant to make me feel invisible. But the effect is the same regardless of your intentions." Bartholomew leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. "Mom, I had no idea you felt this way. Why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I felt the familiar surge of anger that had been my companion for months. "When exactly should I have told you, Bartholomew?" "During one of your 30-second phone calls asking me to watch Wellington, during the brief text exchanges about picking up your dry cleaning. When did you give me an opening to express my feelings?" His face crumpled. We've been so busy with work, with life." "Too busy for your mother." Prudence's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had watched this dynamic play out for too long. "Too busy to include her in family decisions, too busy to ask about her well-being, too busy to consider her feelings when making vacation plans." Cordelia finally spoke up, her voice thick with tears. "I realize now how selfish we've been. I kept thinking we were being independent, not bothering you with every little decision. I thought you preferred it that way." "You thought I preferred being excluded from my own family." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was tired of sugarcoating my pain. "You thought I enjoyed being remembered only when you needed something from me. No, She struggled for words. "I guess I never really thought about it from your perspective. I was so focused on not being the stereotypical demanding daughter-in-law that I went too far in the other direction." Bartholomew reached out tentatively, as if to touch my hand, then pulled back. "Mom, how do we fix this? How do we make it right?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw echoes of the earnest little boy who used to promise to clean his room if I would just read him one more bedtime story. But I also saw a man who had somehow forgotten that his mother was a complete person with her own needs and feelings. "First," I said carefully, "you need to understand that this isn't something that can be fixed with apologies and good intentions. This requires fundamental changes in how you see me and how you include me in your lives." Prudence nodded approvingly. "Your mother isn't your employee, Bartholomew. She's not your backup childcare service or your emergency loan officer. She's a woman who has spent decades putting everyone else's needs before her own, and she deserves better than to be taken for granted." "What do you need from us?" Cordelia asked, her voice small but sincere. "What would make this better?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of suppressed frustration and hurt. "I need to be consulted, not just informed. I need to be invited, not just utilized. I need you to remember that I have preferences, opinions, and feelings that matter." "Like the vacation," Bartholomew said slowly, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "The vacation was just the final straw," I explained. "It was months of being treated like a convenience rather than a family member. It was the assumption that I wouldn't want to join you without ever bothering to ask. It was the casual way you relegated me to dog-sitting duty while you created family memories without me." Cordelia was crying openly now. "I'm so sorry, Beatrice. I'm so very sorry. I never realized. I never saw. That's the problem," I said gently. "You never saw me. You saw Mom Beatrice who takes care of things, but you never saw Beatrice who might want to try new experiences, who might have opinions about family plans, who might enjoy being included in the decision-making process." Prudence leaned forward in her rocking chair. "This family has always been about supporting each other, about being there for one another through thick and thin. But somewhere along the way, that support became one-sided. Beatrice has been giving and giving, while the rest of you have been taking it for granted. How do we change? Bartholomew asked, and I heard genuine desperation in his voice. How do we learn to do better? You start by seeing me as a complete person, I replied. You ask my opinion about family plans. You include me in conversations about decisions that affect all of us. You call me sometimes just to see how I'm doing, not because you need something from me. And you accept that this is going to take time, Prudence added. Changing ingrained patterns isn't easy, but it's necessary if you want to salvage this family. Cordelia wiped her eyes with a tissue Prudence had quietly provided. I want to do better, Beatrice. I want to be the daughter-in-law you deserve. I want us to have a real relationship, not just this utilitarian thing we've fallen into. I want that too, I said, feeling something loosen in my chest for the first time in months. But it's going to require consistent effort from both of you. This can't be a temporary fix that lasts until the next time convenience trumps consideration. Bartholomew nodded emphatically. We'll do whatever it takes. Mom, I don't want to lose you over something that should never have happened in the first place. As the afternoon sunlight slanted through Prudence's lace curtains, I felt something shift in the room, not complete resolution, but the possibility of it. We talked for another 2 hours, establishing new boundaries and expectations, discussing specific ways to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. When I finally drove home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. We weren't magically fixed. Real change would take time and consistent effort from all of us. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I had hoped that we could build something better than what we had lost. The credit cards could wait another day. Today had been about something far more valuable than money. It had been about reclaiming my place in my own family. The weeks following our family meeting at Prudence's house felt like learning to walk again after a long illness. Every interaction with Bartholomew and Cordelia carried the weight of our new understanding, and I found myself hyper-aware of each gesture, each word, each attempt at rebuilding what had been broken. Change, I discovered, was messier and more complicated than any of us had anticipated. The first real test came just 4 days after our emotional afternoon at Prudence's. My phone rang at 7 a.m, an hour when Cordelia typically called only when she needed something urgent. My stomach clenched as I reached for it, bracing myself for the familiar request disguised as casual conversation. Good morning, Beatrice. Cordelia's voice was different somehow, more careful, more tentative. I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to ask. Well, Bartholomew and I were thinking about trying that new Italian restaurant downtown this Friday, and we wondered if you'd like to join us. Not because we need anything, she added quickly, but because we'd enjoy your company. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, my coffee mug halfway to my lips. This was exactly what I had asked for, to be included, to be invited for the pleasure of my company rather than the convenience of my services. Yet after years of the opposite, the invitation felt almost surreal. I'd love that, I managed, my voice catching slightly. What time works best for you? Whatever suits you, she replied, and I could hear the genuine effort in her tone. We want to work around your schedule for once. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a cautious hope bloom in my chest. It was a small gesture, but it represented something significant, the recognition that I had preferences, that my time mattered, that my company was valued beyond what I could provide. The dinner turned out to be surprisingly pleasant. Bartholomew had clearly coached himself to ask about my life, my interests, my thoughts on topics beyond family logistics. When I mentioned that I had been considering taking up watercolor painting, something I had dreamed about for years but never pursued, he didn't dismiss it or change the subject. Instead, he spent 20 minutes asking thoughtful questions about what drew me to that particular art form. Cordelia, too, seemed to be making a conscious effort. She asked about my book club, remembered details from previous conversations, and actually listened to my responses instead of waiting for her turn to speak. When the server brought our dessert, she surprised me by saying, "Beatrice, you have such interesting perspectives on things. I feel like I've missed out on so many good conversations over the years." It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses where old habits tried to reassert themselves, moments when I could see them catching themselves before falling into familiar patterns. But it was progress, and progress felt like a small miracle after so many years of stagnation. The real transformation, however, was happening within me. For the first time in decades, I began to rediscover who Beatrice was when she wasn't defined by her usefulness to others. I enrolled in that watercolor class I had mentioned, something that would have seemed impossibly selfish just months earlier. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I sat in a sun-filled studio, learning to see light and shadow with new eyes, surrounded by other adults who were there simply for the joy of creating something beautiful. My instructor, a woman named Millicent, who had to be at least 85, became an unexpected source of wisdom. The hardest part about learning to paint later in life, she told me one evening, as I struggled with a particularly challenging landscape, isn't the technique. It's giving yourself permission to be bad at something, to be a beginner, to do something purely for your own satisfaction. Her words resonated deeper than she could have known. I had spent so many years being competent, reliable, indispensable, that I had forgotten the simple pleasure of pursuing something with no purpose beyond personal fulfillment. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of rebellion against the woman I had been the one who existed primarily to serve others' needs. I also began taking long walks through the historic district of our town, something I had always meant to do, but never found time for when my schedule revolved around everyone else's needs. I discovered charming coffee shops I had driven past for years, struck up conversations with neighbors I had only waved to in passing, and began to build a life that belonged entirely to me. The changes in my relationship with Bartholomew and Cordelia continued to evolve, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with painful setbacks. There was the evening when Cordelia called asking me to watch Wellington because they had an important dinner, then caught herself mid-sentence and said, "Actually, would you be available and willing to watch Wellington? We have a work dinner, but if you have other plans or just don't feel like it, we can find another solution." The difference in phrasing was subtle but profound. She was asking rather than assuming, offering me the option to decline without guilt or justification. When I said I'd be happy to help, but that I had painting class until 8, she immediately adjusted their plans rather than asking me to skip my class. There were also moments that reminded me how deeply ingrained our old patterns had become. One Saturday afternoon, Bartholomew showed up unannounced with a list of errands he needed help with, falling back into the assumption that my time was freely available to him. When I gently pointed out that he hadn't asked if I was busy or available to help, his face crumpled with genuine remorse. "I did it again, didn't I?" he said, sinking onto my porch steps. "I'm trying so hard to change. Mom, but these habits are so automatic. Instead of rushing to comfort him or minimize the impact of his thoughtlessness, my old response, I sat down beside him and spoke honestly. Yes, you did it again, and it hurt, just like it always has. But the difference is that you recognized it and you're genuinely trying to do better. That matters more than you know. We talked for over an hour that afternoon, really talked about the challenges of changing lifelong patterns, about the difference between intention and impact, about the work it takes to see the people we love as complete individuals rather than extensions of ourselves. It was one of the most honest conversations we had ever had, and it marked a turning point in our relationship. The real breakthrough came 6 weeks after our family meeting, when Cordelia called with an unexpected invitation. Bartholomew and I are planning a weekend trip to the coast, she began, and my heart immediately began to sink into familiar territory. But then she continued, we were hoping you might want to join us. We found this lovely bed and breakfast that has rooms available, and we thought it might be nice to spend some time together somewhere beautiful. But only if you're interested. We know you might prefer to stay home, or you might have other plans. I was quiet for so long that she began to worry. Beatrice, are you there? Did I say something wrong? No, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You said something very, very right. That weekend at the coast became a revelation for all of us. Without the familiar routines and distractions of home, we were forced to actually engage with each other as people rather than falling into our established roles. I watched Bartholomew discover that his mother had opinions about architecture, literature, and local history that had nothing to do with family logistics. Cordelia seemed genuinely surprised to learn that I had a wicked sense of humor and strong views about everything from politics to the best way to make clam chowder. On our last evening, as we sat on the inn's porch watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and rose, Cordelia reached over and took my hand. I owe you an apology that goes much deeper than anything I've said before, she began. I didn't just exclude you from that mountain trip. I excluded you from my understanding of who you are as a person. I turned you into a function rather than seeing you as Beatrice, someone with her own dreams, preferences, and remarkable stories to tell. Bartholomew nodded, his eyes also fixed on the horizon. I grew up knowing you as the strongest, most capable person in my world. Somehow, as an adult, I forgot that strength and capability don't make someone less deserving of consideration and care. I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to remember that. As I sat there holding my daughter-in-law's hand, watching my son struggle to articulate feelings he had never been asked to examine, I realized that our family crisis had given us something unexpected, the opportunity to build a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who we had assumed each other to be. The journey back to myself had led me back to them, but on entirely new terms. I was no longer the woman who existed primarily to serve others' needs, and they were no longer the people who took that service for granted. We were 3 adults learning to love and respect each other with intention rather than assumption. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when I first froze those credit cards in a moment of desperate frustration. It was something much better, a beginning. The months that followed our coastal weekend retreat unfolded like the careful restoration of an antique tapestry, delicate work that required patience, skill, and the understanding that some damage might be permanent while new beauty could still emerge. I had spent 71 years learning to be the woman everyone needed me to be. And now I was discovering who I was when those needs no longer defined me. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. Real change, I learned, happens in small increments, in the pause before responding to a request, in the conscious choice to prioritize my own needs, in the gradual rebuilding of relationships on foundations of mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. Some days felt like victories. Others reminded me how deeply ingrained our old patterns had become. 3 months after our family meeting, Cordelia surprised me with a phone call that would have been unthinkable in our previous relationship. "Beatrice," she said, her voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "I know this might sound strange, but I've been thinking about what you said about watercolor painting. I've always been curious about art, and I was wondering, would you mind if I joined your class? Only if you'd be comfortable with that. I don't want to intrude on your space." The request caught me completely off guard. My first instinct was the familiar rush of pleasure at being needed, at having someone show interest in my activities. But I forced myself to pause, to consider whether I actually wanted to share this particular space with Cordelia, or whether I needed to keep it as something entirely my own. "I'd need to think about it," I said honestly. "This class has become very important to me. It's one of the first things I've done purely for myself in decades. Let me consider whether I'm ready to share it." The old Beatrice would never have asked for time to consider such a request. She would have immediately agreed, perhaps even apologized for needing to think about it. But this new version of myself understood that my comfort and preferences mattered just as much as anyone else's desires. After a week of reflection, I called Cordelia back. "I've decided I'd enjoy having you in the class," I told her, "but I need you to understand that this is my space first. I won't be responsible for teaching you or making sure you're comfortable. If you join as a fellow student, not as my responsibility." "I wouldn't want it any other way," she replied, and I could hear genuine understanding in her voice. Watching Cordelia struggle with her first attempts at watercolor became an unexpected gift. She was used to excelling at everything she attempted her career, her home management, her social navigation. Seeing her fumble with basic brush techniques, her perfectionist tendencies clashing with the fluid unpredictability of watercolor, helped me understand her in ways I never had before. "How do you stand it?" she asked me one evening after a particularly frustrating session where her planned sunset had turned into what she called an explosion in an orange paint factory. "How do you accept being terrible at something?" I looked at her paint-stained fingers, her furrowed brow, her expression of genuine bewilderment, and felt something shift between us. "Because being terrible at something new is better than being invisible at something familiar," I replied. "For years, I was excellent at being what everyone needed me to be, but I had no idea who I was when I wasn't being useful to someone else." That conversation marked the beginning of a different kind of relationship between Cordelia and me. Instead of the careful politeness that had characterized our post-crisis interactions, we began to develop something that felt almost like friendship. She started asking my advice not about family logistics, but about personal dilemmas, whether to take a promotion that would require more travel, how to handle a difficult colleague, what she should do about her own complicated relationship with her mother. More importantly, she began sharing her own vulnerabilities with me. I learned that her driven, controlling personality stemmed from deep insecurities about not being good enough, smart enough, successful enough. Her tendency to exclude me from decisions hadn't been malicious. It had been her way of trying to prove she could handle everything independently, without needing help from anyone. "I think I was threatened by you," she admitted one Tuesday evening as we cleaned our brushes after class. "You made everything look so effortless, parenting, homemaking, being there for everyone. I wanted to prove I could be just as competent, just as indispensable. I never realized I was making you feel dispensable in the process." These revelations helped me understand that our family dysfunction hadn't been entirely about malice or thoughtlessness. It had been about fear, insecurity, and the ways people can hurt each other while trying to protect themselves. Understanding the roots of the problem didn't excuse the behavior, but it made healing feel possible rather than just necessary. Bartholomew's journey toward change was different but equally meaningful. Where Cordelia approached our new relationship with analytical intensity, Bartholomew seemed to be rediscovering me with the wonder of someone meeting an interesting stranger. He began asking about my childhood, my dreams before marriage and motherhood, my thoughts on topics we had never discussed. One particularly memorable conversation happened during a Sunday walk. We had started taking together another new tradition born from our commitment to actually spending time together rather than just coordinating logistics. He asked me what I had wanted to be when I grew up, and I found myself telling him about my adolescent dreams of becoming a journalist, traveling the world, writing stories that mattered. "Why didn't you pursue that?" he asked, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. "Life happened," I replied. "Marriage, children, responsibilities. By the time you kids were grown, I felt too old to start over." "Do you still think about it sometimes?" The question hung between us as we paused to watch a family of ducks navigate the pond in the town park. "More often lately," I admitted. "I've been thinking about taking a writing class, maybe trying to write some of the stories I've carried around for decades." "You should do it," he said with an enthusiasm that surprised me. "Mom, you're only 71. You could have 20 or 30 years ahead of you. That's enough time for an entire second career if you want one." His words planted a seed that grew over the following weeks. I found myself researching writing programs at the community college, reading books about late-in-life career changes, imagining possibilities I had dismissed for years. The woman who had spent decades believing her productive years were behind her began to consider that they might actually be just beginning. The most significant test of our new family dynamic came 6 months after that first dinner invitation, when Cordelia and Bartholomew announced they were planning a 2-week European vacation. My heart immediately began its familiar descent toward disappointment. Surely this would be another family adventure that didn't include me. But instead of the casual announcement I expected, they approached me with careful planning and genuine consideration. "We're thinking about Italy and France," Bartholomew explained during a family dinner at my house, another new tradition we had established. "We wanted to talk to you about it because we'd love for you to come with us, but we also know it's a big commitment and you might prefer to do your own thing. We've researched accessible tours and hotels," Cordelia added, "and we found some that include art museums and cooking classes, things we thought you might enjoy. But we also looked into apartments where you could have your own space if you wanted to join us, but maintain some independence." I stared at them both, speechless. They had not only invited me, they had planned around my potential interests and needs. They had considered my comfort, my preferences, my desire for both inclusion and autonomy. "I'm overwhelmed," I managed finally, "not because I don't want to go, but because you've put so much thought into making this work for all of us. The European trip became a revelation in ways I never expected. Traveling with Bartholomew and Cordelia as an equal partner rather than a dependent or obligation showed me dimensions of their personalities I had never seen. Cordelia's careful research and planning revealed itself as genuine care rather than control. Bartholomew's enthusiasm for exploring new places reminded me of the curious little boy he had been, the one who used to ask endless questions about everything we encountered. More importantly, the trip allowed me to see myself through their eyes for the first time in years. When I confidently navigated the Florence train station using my rusty college Italian, when I struck up conversations with local artists at a market in Provence, when I surprised them both by booking us a cooking class in Rome on my own initiative, I saw them recognize me as a competent, interesting adult rather than just their aging mother. "I had no idea you were so adventurous," Cordelia said one evening as we sat in a sidewalk cafe in Paris, watching the world go by with glasses of wine and plates of cheese. "You've always seemed so steady, so domestic. I never imagined you as someone who would bargain with street vendors or convince a museum guard to let us into a closed exhibit. I never imagined myself that way either," I replied honestly. "I think I forgot that part of myself existed. It took losing everything familiar to remember who I was before I became who everyone needed me to be." The conversation that followed was one of the most honest we had ever shared. Cordelia talked about her own fears of losing herself in marriage and career expectations. Bartholomew admitted that he had unconsciously categorized me as settled and satisfied because it was easier than acknowledging that I might have unfulfilled dreams and unmet needs. I think we all trapped each other in these limited versions of ourselves, I reflected. You saw me as the stable, nurturing mother, and I played that role so completely that I forgot I was anything else. You became the busy, successful children who didn't need me anymore, and I accepted that rather than finding new ways to connect. That evening in Paris marked the completion of a journey that had begun with frozen credit cards and angry confrontations. We had all learned to see each other as complete, complex human beings rather than the simplified roles we had inhabited for so long. The flight home was bittersweet sad to leave the magic of discovery and new experiences, but excited to return with a fundamentally transformed understanding of our family. We weren't the same people who had struggled through that painful mountain weekend crisis 8 months earlier. We were 3 adults who had learned to love each other with intention, respect, and genuine appreciation for who we actually were, rather than who we thought we were supposed to be. As I unlocked my front door and stepped back into my familiar house, I felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had traveled farther than the miles on our boarding passes suggested. I had journeyed back to myself, and in doing so, I had found my way back to my family not as their servant or convenience, but as Beatrice, a woman worthy of love, respect, and consideration, simply because she existed and mattered. The credit cards had been unfrozen months ago, but the lessons they taught us about respect, boundaries, and the true meaning of family would last for the rest of our lives. A year after that frozen credit card moment that changed everything, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. This morning, I woke up in my own apartment in the Arts District, downtown, a cozy space I rented 6 months ago when I decided I wanted to live somewhere that reflected who I am now, not who I used to be. The walls are covered with my watercolor paintings, some good, some terrible, all mine. My writing desk sits by the window where I work on the memoir I never thought I'd have the courage to write. The relationship with Bartholomew and Cordelia has evolved into something I never dared hope for: genuine friendship built on mutual respect. They visit regularly, not because they need something, but because they enjoy my company. Last week, Cordelia brought her sister to meet me, introducing me as my brilliant mother-in-law who's become one of my dearest friends. The pride in her voice brought tears to my eyes. Bartholomew calls every Tuesday evening, not to check a task off his dutiful son list, but because we've discovered we both love discussing books and current events. He often seeks my advice on work decisions, genuinely valuing my perspective as someone who has navigated decades of professional and personal challenges. But the most profound change is in how I see myself. I'm no longer the woman who exists primarily to serve others' needs. I volunteer at a literacy center twice a week, teaching adults to read work that fulfills me in ways that family obligation never could. I've joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered I love being outdoors more than I ever imagined. Next month, I'm taking my first solo trip to New Mexico to visit art galleries and maybe take a pottery class. The woman who once felt invisible has learned to take up space unapologetically. When restaurant servers ignore me or store clerks dismiss me because of my age, I speak up with confidence I never knew I possessed. When family members or friends try to fall back into old patterns of taking me for granted, I address it immediately and directly. My house, the one where I raised my children and nursed my husband through his final illness, now serves as a gathering place for my book club, painting group, and the writing circle I started last spring. It's filled with laughter, intellectual discussion, and the energy of people pursuing their passions rather than just fulfilling their obligations. The frozen credit cards were just the beginning. They forced a conversation that led to transformation none of us could have imagined. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I discovered that people can change when they're held accountable with love rather than anger. Most importantly, I realized that it's never too late to reclaim your life and live it on your own terms. At 72, I'm finally living as Beatrice, not as someone's mother, mother-in-law, or caretaker, but as a complete person worthy of respect, consideration, and love. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference in the world. My story isn't just about family drama or frozen credit cards. It's about one of life's most crucial truths. We teach people how to treat us by what we accept, what we tolerate, and what we allow to continue unchallenged. For decades, I taught my family that my feelings didn't matter by never expressing them. I taught them that my time wasn't valuable by always making it freely available. I taught them that I didn't deserve consideration by never asking for it. Without realizing it, I had become complicit in my own invisibility. The moment I froze, those credit cards wasn't really about money. It was about refusing to continue teaching them that I could be taken for granted. It was about saying, for the first time in years, I matter too. Here's what I want every person watching this to understand: your worth isn't determined by how useful you are to others. Your value doesn't increase when you sacrifice your own needs for someone else's convenience. You have the right to be seen, heard, and respected simply because you exist. If you're feeling invisible in your own life, if you're tired of being remembered only when people need something from you, if you've lost yourself in the endless cycle of serving everyone else's needs, please know that it's never too late to change the dynamic. It starts with one conversation, one boundary, one moment when you choose yourself. You don't have to freeze anyone's credit cards, but you do have to find your voice. You have to be willing to risk temporary discomfort for lasting respect. You have to stop accepting crumbs and start expecting the full meal of genuine care and consideration. The people who truly love you will rise to meet your standards when you finally set them, and those who don't, well, that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship. Your life is precious, your time is valuable, and your feelings matter. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you found the courage to speak up when people took you for granted? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this message resonated with you, please subscribe to join our community of people who believe that every life has value and every voice deserves to be heard.